Makeover Monday Viz Review for week 44, and I am delighted that today with me from Operation Fistula is Helen. Hi Helen, how are you?
Hi, I'm really well. It's great to be here. It's great to be here with all of you.
Yay, very exciting. So Helen, maybe for those who don't know you, because normally we have Seth on the show, can you briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I am Helen Davies. I work at Operation Fistula with Seth Cochran, and I work as the Chief of Staff. So I work across all our programs, and I also have been I was with them in Seattle when they presented this at Tableau, and it's just super exciting to be here. It's great to be at my first Biz review.
Yeah, excited to have you. And you're normally the one, tackling all those comments, and it's cool that you're doing this with me today. And that trip to Seattle was the last time where we were out,
I
right?
know. You were one of the last people I saw in person.
Yeah, same here. That was my last flight, and then the world changed. So, yeah, so we're gonna tackle the data today. I'm gonna just move us over to the side and bring up the screen. So, just for everyone, we'll have a quick look at data.world because what I'm gonna get you to do, Helen, is just to briefly mention all the things you've provided to us aside from just the data set, so people know what they can use if they haven't looked at the data yet.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously there's the original Viz for Viz Review. That's created in-house by us, by my colleague Will, who's our analytics manager. He enjoys creating bad Vizes for you guys to make over. We have lots of jokes about it. But in terms of the other resources that we always produce, so every Viz 5 month we do this, there's an info packet. So that's there's an info packet and there's a data dictionary. So the info packet is always just labeled with the week, the theme. It's a PDF file. It typically has information about the theme. It goes into more detail about, in this case, the digital gender gap. It gives you tons of resources, quotes, references. It gives additional context. It's a really valuable document. And I know for many of you, when you open it, it probably feels incredibly long. But even just quickly scanning through it, doing a quick read can give you some really valuable insights into what's going on. And then the data dictionary, I'm sure you're all more familiar with. This is just talking about the different cells and columns and rows and what the data is and how it's been calculated. Any additional context on it also includes the data source, how it was collected, and any additional context. One interesting additional note that we added into the data dictionary for this month was that the World Wide Web Foundation, who are our partners this month, they actually calculate the gender gap in a very different way than the data set that we shared this month. And they use women as the reference point versus men. So it might be just interesting for the community if you want to dig a little deeper this month to check that out on their site, just to see how they're taking a more women-centered approach.
Yeah, and I like that, especially for these kind of data sets. When we know that the male view is the status quo, it's refreshing to sometimes see it the other way and to understand that. So, like Helen said, there are 2 PDF documents. Do check them out. I find the data dictionary is always super helpful if you're wondering what does this field mean. And then they've also provided not just the dashboard and the data, but some logos for Operation Fistula and visualize gender equality that you can include in your Vizes.
Yeah, and I just want to say, can I jump in and just say it's been great to see the number of people who are using those logo files and helping to promote this project and this effort. It is phenomenal for us to get that kind of profile raising for Viz 5 so we can get people excited about the work.
Absolutely. So everyone's a spokesperson, for gender equality during these weeks. So we have a collection. I doubt we'll get through all of them. I've tried to include as many different types of Vizes as possible. We'll start in chronological order from November 2nd. And let's make a start with Johannes Viz. And there is no link. Is there a link?
I think that's
yes,
just
I clicked
maybe in that, yeah.
on her tweet, and in the responses is the link. And hello everyone who is on the chat. I'm just struggling to reach, if I move over to the computer where the chat is, then you can't hear me in the microphone. So we do follow your comments. Please keep them coming. And it's great to have you all with us. Okay, so first one is this verse by Johanna and the gender gap in internet access. So I like that she's included with a description because, with this topic, Helen, my thought is that a lot of people probably have never thought about there being a gender gap in internet access. So while your audience might understand gender gap and internet access, bringing the two together might be a novel concept. So it's a good idea to just explain in your words, what does this mean? What are we talking about here?
So this data is essentially a calculation. It's representative of the calculation, and the calculation tells so it's developed by the Economist's Intelligence Unit, and what it's calculating is the gap, the difference in access between access to the internet and access in mobile phones between men and women. So, for example, in this particular viz, you can see, I think that's probably Pakistan right at the top there, up in the 70th percentile. That means that 70%, there's a gap of 70%. So 70% more, that men have 70% more access to the internet than women do in Pakistan, and same with mobile phones. One of the things that I mentioned to Eva before the call was that one of the things I find frustrating about the way that the Economist Intelligence Unit have done the calculations and represented this data is that where there is a higher access to the internet and mobile phones for men, the data is represented as a positive value, versus where women have more access, it's represented as a negative value. And I think that just, if you think about that from the perspective of systems and what that tells your audience and how that's communicated just as a very basic first impression, that if women have more access, they're a negative value. One of the things I was curious about is I wanted to see if anyone from the Makeover Monday community would just flip the negative and positive values, right? Because it wouldn't really do anything to the messaging other than show that where women have more parity of access and where things are more equal and more balanced, that should be represented as a positively reinforced message. I just thought I'd mention that because I think it's a really important thing to think about when you're looking at data like this.
It's a good point, and I think there's also maybe an argument for working with the absolute values. So if I look at this viz by Johanna, you could flip it so that all those long bars where the men have more access are on the left and the shorter ones where women have more access are on the right. But maybe the access, instead of having minus and plus, it could just be the absolute value, but then you label the two sections of the access with men have more access and women have more access, just to make it clear what the two sides are. Now,
yeah, exactly. That would be really powerful as well.
What do you think in terms of the design? One thing I notice is that the top is very empty. Like, it's almost like, why does the text not start at the top? And how do you feel about those text boxes covering the data?
So in terms of the gap at the top, I have a similar feeling, especially because for me, the data chart feels very compressed. It feels very small and difficult to sort of see and get insights from. I think having text over the bars makes it really challenging to properly engage with the viz and kind of click into the country level detail. But, they do provide valuable context. They provide, sort of big high level summary of what the data shows. But I think perhaps they would have been better in a tooltip or something similar.
Yeah, I agree, especially because when we come back to, I think it's almost a square or maybe a square, this viz, in terms of the layout. There's a lot of blank space at the top, but the data is really, the bars are really skinny. Like, the data is already quite a small part of the entire picture, but then it's also covered up. And yeah, like you suggest, it distracts and it makes me not able to really see what the data is. So there might be a better way to do that. Okay, now, in the interest of time, let's move right along to the next viz, where the first thing I noticed is it was all yellow. It's very yellow.
It's very yellow.
And, as I bring together this collection of vizes, and I'm like, I obviously see at least a snapshot of each one. And I've been thinking, I cannot think of a single instance where a yellow background would be my first choice, like where it would be a better choice than any other color. So yeah, I'm really surprised, like, why the need for a yellow background. And that would be, if you only change one thing, get rid of the yellow, would be my suggestion here. Now, what's the impression you have from this viz?
My initial first impression is just, wow, that's pretty hard to look at because of that bright yellow background. I can only think of two examples either where a yellow background would be good, and that would be if it was data on bananas or Big Bird. but you know, the other thing is I think that yellow almost makes it really hard to see the contrast because of the colors that have been chosen for the scatter graph, in that there's, I think, an orange for upper middle income countries, and that's almost fading into the yellow, and the pink, then when the pink and the orange are next to each other because of that yellow background, it's hard to differentiate. So yeah, I would just probably go back to having just a plain background. I think there's a lot of text. I think it's quite small and hard to read. And I did think it was an interesting decision to I think it's great that people are, you know, inspired by the themes and do look at the high, upper middle income, lower middle income countries to sort of get that additional perspective. But when we're looking at the gender gap, to give so much space in the viz to data that's outside of kind of the scope of the presentation, I think is, you know, it could have again been included if you wanted to include that on a tooltip and given more precedence to the data gap data.
Yeah, I agree with you there. It's a bit confusing because also it takes up the prime real estate. You know, after the heading, the first thing I notice is this bar chart, but it really doesn't tell me anything about the digital gender gap. The other challenge I have with the colors is in the map, pink is female, blue is male, which makes me very tense because I think the times of baby pink and baby blue are well and truly over in 2020. But also on the right side, pink and blue have a different meaning. They mean lower middle income and higher income countries. So if you select specific colors, they should only have a single meaning. Or if you want to use color just for design, then feel free to use it throughout. But then it shouldn't have any meaning. It should just be for decorative purposes, I suppose.
And I had one other thing to add on the map as well, which is that because of the color spectrum that's been used, not just the pink and the blue, but the density of the color palette, it does appear that in certain countries, it's as if female access is extremely high. But again, you know, in the gender gap data, you see that really in the countries where women do have more access, I think the highest percentage was minus 10%, which means that that's really just navigating towards parity in those countries. And I think to present them on a map with such extreme colors makes it appear that, you know, somehow women in those countries have, you know, an extremely higher level of access than men. I just wanted to raise that as well.
That's a really good point, because it means that the color legend isn't scaled the same on both sides. You're not using the full range. It should be that whatever is the maximum for men, so let's say I think it's about 70% or something was the maximum gap. It should also then be that the female color, so the deepest pink should also be at 70%, which then would mean everything is very pale pink, because it's just not that big a difference. Towards, you know, the female benefit, I guess. Okay, so I think in terms of the text, I agree with you that it's quite a lot. I like when people build a story. I think it just needs to be designed differently. So maybe if you, instead of having 2 chunks of text, have 4, and think about a newspaper where you have different blocks of text that are, you know, maybe just 2, maximum 3 sentences, short ones, and then comes the next block of text, because it's just easier to digest for people. So you can keep the same amount of words, but it's easier for people to, work their way through it, because it doesn't look so intimidating.
No, exactly. And I do like what they've done using bold typeface as well for the specific points they really want to highlight. I think that's a great step.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, then we have Michelle Freeman, and Michelle is online. And I've already tried to send her a virtual hug through WhatsApp because, as quite a few other people, Michelle is in the US, and with the election not being decided yet, but going the way it's looking to go, there is a bit of tension. So Michelle, sending you another virtual hug, and thank you for being on and for submitting your viz. Okay, so we've got a black background and the digital divide, and this is a bit of a signature move from Michelle to to really focus on bringing the topic into the title in terms of the font choice. So I think that's really cool. And great. So there's a bit of a description up front, which is great. And then we have the top 10 countries where, for internet access and mobile phone usage, and the number is the gap. And
right. So, sorry. Go ahead.
The last point I wanted to make is my first hunch is to say I wouldn't necessarily call them top 10 because the gap is not a good thing, which obviously Michelle knows. So maybe to just reword that where it's like 10 countries with the biggest gap. Then I know biggest is then kind of in the middle of the sentence, or biggest gender gap in internet access in these countries, smallest gender gap, or it's twice the biggest gap, but for different topics. You're nodding.
I had exactly the same feeling. I think this is a great viz. I love the opening sentence, right? One of the most effective ways to empower girls and women is safe, reliable access to mobile phones and the internet. Like that immediately conveys what's going to, the story that the viz is going to tell. But I agree. I think it's actually a theme in a number of the vizzes from this month. The use of top 10 or top 5, it automatically makes you go into this traditional top to bottom mentality, which again presents this challenge with the fact that where women have more access, it's a negative value. It's really tough mentally for humans to understand that, a negative number would actually be a better thing. And in this case, when you see top 10, you automatically think of, top 10 highest performing, top 10, the best, top 3, gold, silver, bronze. You go into those hierarchies. So just kind of thinking about creative ways to reword, you could, countries where the gender gap in mobile phone usage is, you could make them the worst performing countries, right? You could even go that extreme.
Yes, yeah. So it does just need the rewording. And then on the right side, so I'm just going to read out the annotation for Pakistan. It says, Pakistan has the greatest digital divide overall and is more than 2 times as much as the next highest country for mobile access. And I think it's just that second part of the sentence where I'm stumbling over the words, and I think I'm not sure about the grammar, but just I think there's maybe a more elegant way to say that. So maybe it's, they have the greatest digital divide, or maybe the biggest. To me, great always sounds positive as well, which is also something when I hear about the Great War, where I think there's nothing great about it. But that aside, maybe Pakistan has the biggest digital divide overall and is more than twice as likely. No, twice. It's more. Oh! I see. I understand it now. And maybe. So it has the greatest digital divide overall, and its gender gap for mobile access is twice as big as that of the second ranked country, which I know is longer, but might be a bit easier to understand. Something along those lines. I hope that makes sense. Now, Helen, I've seen quite a few of these scatter plots, and we've got more in the vizzes coming next. But what do you think of the scatter plots and using those?
I think it's quite difficult to get. How to say this? I think it's quite difficult to get a nuanced picture because there's so much clustering around specific percentage points. Mm-hmm. There's so much overlap and so much kind of clustering of those data points that it's quite difficult to understand what's being presented and what's being portrayed. I also struggle a little bit again with this question of parity because, that 50 percentage point where men perhaps would have 50% more access, I think we have to bear in mind that it's about more access versus no access or less access or no access at all. And so I struggle that, again, there's this deep clustering and you don't get a sense of the progress that can be made in the other direction. Does that make sense?
Do you mean... you mean the cluster on the 0 line?
Yeah. And all around that central point.
Yeah.
That just means there is very little gap or no gap, which is where we want to be. And so not being able to sort of dial into those numbers and understand those countries where they are the highest performing, right?
Yeah,
Is
because
a
one
little
question
difficult.
is, what are they doing right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah. Okay, good points. And I'm sure Michelle will make something of them, because that's just what she does. Now, then we have, I don't know the name of this next person, so let's see what pops up on Tableau Public. Marquee. Okay, here we go. I chose this viz because it has the box and whisker plot, and by now people probably know what I'm going to say. If you show a box and whisker plot, you have to explain how to read it, because most people don't know. The digital gender gap, inequality in opportunities. I find that difficult to understand. Maybe it could be something like unequal opportunities, and there's an R missing. It's opportunity. It should be opportunities. Okay. The gender gap by the percentage of households internet access. I would say a statement that's a bit simpler, that maybe draws some conclusion, would be a really useful title for the charts. Positive value indicates greater male access. So we've already kind of covered that. Should it be that way? I'm not quite sure what to take away from this viz, because it has a lot of information, but I'm not really able to access that information easily. And I don't understand why we have this box and whisker plot.
Yeah, I have to say I struggle to sort of understand what's going on here in the data, or get a clear message or a clear story that's being told. In part because, again, I think I probably fall into the category of people who could use a little help with a box and whisker plot.
Yeah, fair enough.
But I also did want to say, just in terms of basic kind of first impressions in design, one of the things I found difficult with this viz is that there's so much going on across visually, and that long sort of title with all the numbers and percentages underneath it. And then there's another subheading in blue. And then you have the red for the Viz5 logo, and the orange and the blue and the gray. I find that my eye is struggling to find a place to rest and to find like a core point or central message. So that's kind of my first impression on this viz.
Yeah, it's very busy, and there's a lot of bold text, which it's almost like everything is competing for your attention, like you said. I also find, I think what is helpful is having this broken down into the different percentage ranges. Okay, so what we can see, if we know how to read these charts, or just have basic understanding, is that Marquee has categorized the different countries into buckets of their internet access and their mobile phone access. And I like the call out where it says I would word it differently, but lowest internet users group has widest range in gender gap. So the countries where there is the lowest percentage of internet access in the first place, so the fewest people have access to the internet, there's also the biggest gender gap. So it looks like there's already very few people able to access the internet, and if they are able, they're probably just the men, or mainly men, who can access it. Which is, I think, a useful insight and an interesting one, but it's hard for me to figure that out from here. And that could even be the main story of the viz. And then, we see the spread between what the gender gap is, or the range gets smaller and smaller the more we get to close to 100% of internet access. I just find it's a difficult way to communicate the information, because the idea of data visualization is to make it easier for us to access. And I don't think this is any easier or more effective in telling the story than the original. Okay, and then next up we have Allison Harris. Okay, let me put this into full screen mode to make it a bit bigger for everyone. And this one is very different from what we've seen so far. It's a bit KPI dashboard-y, and I like that.
Yeah, I like this one too. I think that the initial message in the top left of, nearly 50% of the world doesn't have access, globally 21% more likely if you're a man, which means 300 million fewer women, right? And I just think those core takeaways are so clear about what's being presented.
Yeah.
And then you can go into the next sections of the viz and really drill down into more detail.
Yes, I really like the simplicity of it, and I love the explanations or those arrows on the right side, and just focusing on the countries that are closing the gap, the ones where they're pretty much at parity, and what it means to be, on the left or the right. So that's really neat. I think there's one text box that's a bit cut off. It says the list includes countries who are greater than 50% of households with internet and gender, and then it stops. So maybe having a look at the formatting there, but yeah, I like those big call-outs. I think it's really easy to understand.
Yeah, and I think it's very cool that the viz is showing who's closing the gap. I agree. Just really, like we were saying about the scatter plot, right? In the opposite side, this really drills down into that line of where countries should be. That's the goal. The goal is to be at parity.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so well done, Allison. Very neat. And
I love the colors too. Yeah. I thought it was very clean and crisp.
Yeah, definitely. And then we have Liz Bravo. So last week she delivered this outstanding viz. It was so creative. And this week she did something very creative again. And this is a PDF, so I'm just going to have to zoom in and kind of scroll. So gender gap in internet access. So there's a bit of explanation. And then what I really like is just the how to read the viz kind of section. So the visualization uses the word female-like wordplay to represent both genders. The gradient color highlights the gender that internet access exceeds. So you either see the male part or you see the whole word, or if you cannot read any gender, the gender gap doesn't exist. So I think this is really clever. And yeah, I'm just going to scroll slowly and let you comment as well.
I mean, the visual of this is phenomenal. I love the fact that at the top it looks like an old World Wide Web window, right? With the kind of the URL and that level of detail. I think it was very clever. I also, I love that the color it chosen is the same that appears automatically for a hyperlink. Like, I think there's so many layers of design here that are really cool.
Yeah.
I think it's visually really compelling. The only thing that jumped out to me is that because of the color fade, I don't know if it's possible to even just make that blue a little bit more extreme so that it's very clear just how male dominated, right? How inequitable it is across the genders. Yeah. But I do think it's a great viz, and really great that they, use quotes from the materials. They use our logo, the Viz 5 logo. Really powerful.
Yeah, I agree. It's really well done. So thank you, Liz, for another... Oh, now I did this one. For another really cool visualization. Okay. And then we have Tamas. And I'm pretty sure... Yes, I saw quite a lot of people commenting on his viz. I've been a bit busy this week for commenting, so I haven't been as active on Twitter. But I have noticed what's going on. So, this is a long form. So let me bring that into full screen and then scroll down as we go. What do you think of the colors here? It's just loading up on my window. I think this is a really striking viz. I think the color is great. I like that, the effort was made to also make the Viz 5 logo match with the color scheme. That's really cool. Mm-hmm. I do have to say, I would love to hear more about what you think, Eva, but I did find this viz quite complex in terms of the message that it's sharing and the story that it's telling, compared with kind of the story that's just presented in the data. I felt like this took it to kind of another level. What do you think, Eva? Yeah, so I mean the first chart is looking just at internet access. So there's no gender kind of story at the top just yet. And then we're looking at the gender equality one, but I don't understand that chart. So let me have a quick read. So continue the trials, previous analysis, based on household internet access. This way we can look at the average rate of gender equality for each country. So how is that then calculated? Because, okay, so the tooltips need a bit of work. So if we have, okay, I don't understand. How, is this saying that, yeah, I don't understand, because there are, I think every dot is a country. Oh, country is Uzbekistan. But this doesn't look at gender equality, this chart, at least not in my understanding. It looks at, oh, internet users, 75%. Okay, so that is my x-axis, my columns, and then 74% is the gender equality internet access. I don't understand this chart, I really don't. And I think it paints a picture that is far too positive. I mean,
yeah, I had a very similar, I was really struggling to, I think I wish I could have a conversation and ask the questions that I have about kind of what's going on in the chart and how it's been put together. And because when I first looked at it, I had the same feeling. I was confused as to how the values were presenting such positive. I couldn't understand how the Viz got here from the data we shared.
Yeah, and if I look at, so I found Pakistan in the internet access one, and as I know from the previous visits, Pakistan is the one where there's the biggest gap. So I look at the column that says 20%, and on the top part, so 20% is internet users, and then there is 29%. I just don't know what this 29% means, because it says average gender equality for internet access. But because my focus is on those pink lines rather than the really light dots, the pink line suggests that the gender equality, and I can't actually get the tooltip to go, is around 79% maybe, but it's not. These are the countries where only 20% of people have internet access. So how can, like, I really don't understand this analysis, and I don't understand the calculation. Like how can you assume just out of two variables that you can create an index for gender equality? I think that's a bit of a jump to make. Yeah, it looks far too positive given what we've just learned about the data.
Yeah, and there are some comments coming in just to say that the gender gap is converted to gender equality, but again, I'm not sure how that's been done. And as you said, to come up with an index based on, like, what's it based on? Like, what have they done to create those calculations? I think it would just be interesting to know a little bit more detail.
Well, going back to Pakistan, so if we say that so that the gender gap is 70%, right? So let's say out of 100, if I make this right, out of 100 men, 70% have access to internet. Out of 100 women, only 30% have access to internet, right? Something like that. Like, there is a big difference. So I don't understand then how, I don't understand the pink lines. That's the bit I'm not understanding, because this suggests 78% gender equality.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, struggling, not understanding. Now then we have the country overview. So I understand the first row, I think. So, I can click on those rectangles. Gender equality, internet access. I'm just gonna look at the crowd comments again, because I'm trying to make sense of this. Yeah, I don't know if we can just, mean, you're more of an expert than me on kind of equality indices, but can we just say, okay, this is the gap. If I do 1 minus the gap, I have the equality level? It feels, I guess the feeling I have, it feels too simplified.
Well, and it feels too simplified, and also because it's not explained as a methodology in the Viz, it also feels, it becomes very confusing because the story that the data is telling doesn't appear to be represented in these charts. So it becomes quite confusing.
Yes.
But yeah, I think generally speaking, unless you're using the methodology of another group. So I did mention that the World Wide Web Foundation uses women as the reference point versus men. And unless you're referencing like a different methodology and then including that as an explanation in your Viz, I think it's just it can be a little misleading and a little dangerous, I would say, to present the data in such a radically different way if you're not going to show your working and thinking in the Viz as well.
Yeah, I think that would be the very first step, at least, to take, is to just really explain the calculation. And given the topic and the data sources, maybe also back it up with, okay, has someone else used this calculation? Did you make it up? What is it? Now, if I look at the last chart, at first I think, oh, it's a pie chart, because it looks like a pie chart, and then it looks more like a coxcomb chart, maybe. But a pie chart is, part to the whole. But these 3 measures are not something that adds up to 100%. Like, they're all standalone measures. They're related, absolutely, because if you don't have internet access in a household, then you can't really calculate. Or, if someone doesn't have internet access at home, they have a lower chance of accessing the internet because they might only have it at university or at work or in a library, or not at all because they don't have access to any of these places. So they're definitely related, but they're not complementary in terms of, okay, so if someone has 50% here, then the other 2 will also add up to 50%. So I'm not sure if that's the right type of chart to show for this. Again, I don't understand what this shows me. Because if I look at this and I just look at the first row, because they all look like pie charts, they all pretty much look the same, but they have different numbers for different sized wedges. So at the moment I click gender equality, it says Kuwait has 99%. How can a third of a pie be 99%? So I find that very confusing.
Yeah, I found this Viz really beautiful. I thought the design was stunning. I liked the use of the colors. Amazing design. I just couldn't understand what was being done with the data.
Yes, and this is, I do want to put this caveat in here. When we talk about this, I know it can feel personal. It's always just about the work. It's not about the person themselves. People make certain design choices and they experiment, and it's fine. But what I would say is, I have a number of years of experience in data visualization. Helen has a lot of experience with this type of data, looking at equality, looking at gender topics. If we can't figure it out, then the average unknown internet user, let's call them a layperson, will probably also not be able to figure it out. Now, I know that beautiful Vizes attract a lot of attention, and they rightly do, because they make a really great visual impression. But I also encourage everyone to, poke a bit and see, oh, it looks really good. Do I truly understand it? Because you can help the people who design visualizations like that to actually make them, truly great in every aspect, where they make that visual impression, but also really inform and, kind of change people's minds.
And can I piggyback on what you were saying and just say that, for me, every single visualization that's produced during Viz 5 is of value, because it's helping to raise awareness. It's sending something out into the world, into the Twitterverse, that's going to encourage someone to click on it and learn about a topic that they perhaps had no idea about or had never engaged in. And even though I can't understand necessarily the depth of detail in this Viz, one of the things that I think is really encouraging about this is that such a level of effort has been made to kind of go deeper with the data and tell a more complex story. I just, as an outside viewer, I'm not necessarily understanding what's being intended. So I hope it's not a discouraging set of feedback, and that instead, I just want to, I'm always so grateful for everyone for participating in Viz 5, because all of these artifacts are so valuable.
Yeah, and I 100% support you in those comments. And I think it also shows that sometimes, we can't really give you feedback on certain aspects on your design because it's already outstanding. So we have to dig a bit deeper because, some people are at the very start of their journey and they might need a bit of help. Just, okay, let's get the basics right to make sure that everything on your screen looks, coherent and works together. But if you're already at a point in your design journey where you do this so well, we will focus more on the analysis and on, okay, what's really being communicated. So please keep that in mind. And like Helen said, don't be discouraged. So our next one is from Ashad. And I hope Ashad is tuned in or has a chance to listen later. And so we have mobile and internet access, gender gap, the digital gender divide. Digital gender divide is actually not easy to say. And we have a half sunburst chart. So it's, I guess, like the rising sun or the setting sun. And from left to right, the countries are in order of decreasing percentage of households having access to internet. That I need to think about that for a moment, what that actually means. From left to right, decreasing percentage. So the left should have the most access to the internet. Kuwait, 100% of people have internet access. And on the right side, we have Burundi. Okay. I don't know why the chart has this kind of, it reminds me of like a half slice of orange or something, right? Because you see all the little segments, because there is some transparency, but for some reason it's not fully covered up. I was going to be critical at first, and I'm sure I still have things to say, but I quite like how obvious it is to see that there are countries where women have more access because of this inside and outside kind of view.
Yeah, I had the same feeling. And I was going to say, I know the red-green color palette has issues because for color blindness, right? That makes it difficult to differentiate between red-green. But I do think the fact that the green color has been used to show the countries where female access is greater, it kind of gets around the issue of it being a negative percentage because it's very clearly positive, which I think is a good design choice. And I agree that the inside-outside dynamic also makes it very clear.
Yeah, I would really just change the green to blue. But then again, then we have blue for women and red for males. Maybe change the red to something else. I think green can be challenging to work with, but just two different colors that are not red and green. There is something to be said about rounding the ends of a bar. For accuracy, that's not ideal. But this chart is not one you use to be super accurate, because the story this tells to me is, in some countries, women have greater access to the internet, but in most countries, men have greater access, and there's something that needs to be done. And I think there is a way to highlight that even more, and to maybe make a big statement in the middle to say, I don't know, out of 100 countries, there are only 10 where women have greater access. And that greater access is also not that much greater. So maybe something that really explains why do some things stick down and the others poke up, and just calling that out. So I would use that white space in the middle of that half circle.
Yeah, I agree, but I think it tells a powerful story. I agree that having just a summary of what that story is in really bold, clear language would be great.
Okay.
And if they wanted to add the Viz 5 logo, that would be great too.
And the data source and their name. Okay. Couple of audience questions. So, oops, let me move my mic. So, Ashai says, What hashtag should I use if I submit the TGP viz? What's TGP?
The
I don't know what TGP is. Later this week and want some quick feedback. Is that possible? Oh, is it the gender?
I was thinking it might be the gender gap, but
it's not. TGP. Tell us what TGP is. Anyway, the time that I can guarantee feedback from me is during this hour or hour and a bit every Wednesday. The other times I might be able to give feedback, but typically I don't. Simply because in my experience, if I provide feedback to some people on Twitter, then other people ask. And as much as I would love to spend my day doing this, I just don't have the capacity to do a lot of feedback on Twitter. So like there was a suggestion, the gender gap, but that's not TGP, that's TGG. So like Swati suggested, use the hashtag DataFamFeedback. I hope that's still active. Then people know, I mean, you could just say, anyone can give me feedback, but you will probably not hear from me just because of my time constraints. So yeah.
But if you hashtag Viz5, members of the Viz5 community may also, and members of my team could jump in and give feedback as well. So if you always hashtag Viz5, you get access to a whole other community.
Yes. Okay. Then we have Alex Wallachek. How are we for time? Okay, we're good. I think we could easily fill 3 hours with this kind of stuff, but we just don't have 3 hours. We'll see how far we can get. So Alex Wallachek has created a bit of a story, and one main comment I have is the color of the font, because I find it hard to read. It's really important to have a strong contrast between background and foreground. If you want people to read this. Now, obviously, like I can see it and I can read it, but it would be easier to read if the font was white or if the background was darker. I just find they're too close to each other that it's not easy to read. I don't know, what do you think, Helen?
I had exactly the same feeling. In fact, when I was first going through the list for Viz Review, I just looked at the JPEG of this on the tweet and I couldn't read it because the contrast was so low. So I think even if it was just the gray that's been used in the boldface for North America, Europe, Oceania, even if it was just a bit lighter, I think it would make it so much easier to read, especially when you're going to have such a text-heavy Viz. I think having it be clear and easy to read is really important.
Yeah. I like how he's broken up the text with the maps. I just would love the addition of some very small titles for each section, because I feel that unless I read everything, I won't know what's going on. But if you tell me what what each paragraph is about, then I think you'll find more people will go through the Viz in more detail.
Yeah, a little bit of signposting for the reader so that they can get through the story. I do want to say I really appreciate the use of the SDG red. So the red in our logo it aligns with the red that's used in SDG 5, which is the goal for 2030 for a gender equal world. So I do enjoy the use of that red. So good job.
Okay, that was very quick. And then we have Marta. So, there's a link. Now we have seen these curvy connecting lines in other Vizes in the past. So I like that they actually don't just go all to one place, but to the country they relate to. But what I find difficult is that because the countries are colored in green and not red or yellow, I find that confusing, and it's really hard to see the endpoints of the map, on the map.
No, I had the exact same feeling. And I also felt like the whole Viz was very traffic lighty, and not necessarily in a way that was thematically linked to a traffic light color scheme.
Yeah, I also, green can be a difficult color. I don't have a challenge with green in general, but we have a pale yellow background, then we have green font on yellow. We have 2 different font types at least, and then we also have black writing. I just think green font is kind of weird. Like it doesn't seem like a natural choice. So I think just for clarity and let's do this live. I have an idea. Let me download the workbook.
Oh, this is exciting. I love it when you do this.
I do too.
While you're doing that, I do just want to note that this Viz also does struggle with the same challenge as Michelle's, which is the use of top five. Top five automatically makes you think that these are good things, but these are the top five worst performing countries. So I just want to clarify that again.
And I see a comment from Dale that people are getting hung up on this Viz. Now, I'm not sure what Viz he refers to, but getting hung up on something is the whole point of these webinars, because, you know, we want people to get feedback. Is that the map? Oh, that is the map. Okay. Let me go to the map, and I think I'm just going to get rid of the color. Ooh, and let's format the map. Oh, map layers. I always add an outline, because that way you can guarantee that the countries are there and visible no matter what else you remove. Okay, there's still something going on. I think there's still... Oh no, that is... Nope. Don't give people options. Don't give them too many options, let's say. Okay, let's go back to our layers. I don't want the terrain, because I don't want kind of funky things in there. Now, okay, so those colors now. What is that? Okay, I see. That's how it works. So gender gap and internet access. It would be great. So curve Y2. How do I would love to just color the dots in the color of the countries, but I don't know if I can. Let's see. Well, why not create... No, not gonna work. So I will just, to keep this quick and simple, okay, no border. And now I'm gonna make the whole thing workbook. Nope. Format the dashboard. White. And the map also. Okay. White. Make it so. Here we go. Okay, so, and now we're going to make this text black, or just slightly off black. And I'm just going to, instead of saying top 5, I'm just going to say the 5 countries with the biggest. And let's make that bold. Digital gender gap. And we're also going to make that legend slightly off black. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. I think it's cleaner. I mean, I'm biased because I just built it. But what I want to show is you don't have to do much to make it a bit easier for people to navigate through. Oh, I noticed what's missing. We don't have the country borders. Where are they? Country borders. Okay, did that do the trick? Yeah. Okay, so have a look at this and we'll compare it to that one. And Marta, let us know what you think. You're totally free to dismiss all our feedback, but this is kind of what I had in mind when I said what I said. Okay, back to our script and our list of visualizations. Oh, I'm gonna let you talk about the next one and what you think, the one from Muhammad. And page no longer exists. Okay, I
had the same problem with this one. I was gonna say, I think you just have to use the JPEG.
Okay, you're very accommodating. Here we go. Okay, I'll let you do a quick talk on that.
So, first impressions, I think it's creative. I think the title could be clearer. I think it could be made clearer what's going on. But the big issue that I had with this Viz and the challenge of not being able to engage with it live is I don't know if when you click on one of the bars, whether the text displayed on the phone changes. So please understand that everything I'm saying is just based on what I can see in this picture. But one of the challenges I did have is around, these countries towards the bottom of the chart. So from Turkey to Kazakhstan, where it is a negative value, it's not clear through a differentiation of color or anything else that this is actually representative of women having more access. So you don't necessarily get that detail. But again, I don't know if when I click on, say, Kazakhstan, whether the text on the phone would change. I would also just generally, like when we're doing Viz 5, Viz 5 is led by Operation Fistula with Makeover Monday and Tableau Foundation as really critical partners. But if you can always try and include the Viz 5 logo, it just makes it clear that, Operation Fistula with a very specific mission has not, is not producing the data on mobile phones and access to mobile phones and the internet. So I just wanted to clarify that as well. Eva, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I agree with those. I think in terms of design here, the challenge I have is the background makes your colors look very different. I think where the ray of light hits, the dark blue or really dark purple looks really good, but above it's really weird in the shade. So just be mindful that because of how colors are perceived by our eyes and our brain, based on the colors around them, that's just something to be mindful of. I also think because it says, mobile phone access difference B/W. I mean, in a title, I'd always encourage people to spell it out properly. It makes it look like a good thing, kind of. So it says in Pakistan, 68%, it should be of men. It's not that the men have more access, it's that more men have access than women. I mean, it could also be that men have more access. Maybe they get 2 hours a day rather than 1, but I think the wording is a bit, could use some work. But overall, I'm not getting here that this is really bad. I mean, you could argue, it's not life-threatening, it's not like water or food. Sure, it's not. But this is a very, serious situation, and you have called out the top ones. There's, maybe you focus on the top 10 or the top 5. I mean, the worst 5. But it doesn't show me clearly that this is something that needs to change. So that's my suggestion, to make that more obvious.
Absolutely. And in terms of context for the theme, it can feel very theoretical to talk about the gender gap in internet access and mobile phone access, but there are really serious underlying reasons for that gap and for that lack of access. For example, affordability, education and digital skills. In a lot of countries where women do have a higher level of access to the internet, they can't use it and engage with it because their digital skills and their education level is an inhibitor and is a barrier. But then on top of that, there's things like your income status and even just your geography. If you live in a very rural area in a low-income country, you're not going to have access. And then when you think about access to the internet as an indicator, think about the number of barriers that have to be overcome as a global community for that person to access the resources available online. The internet is a gateway. The web is a place where you can access tons of opportunities, resources, information, learning, the list goes on. So I know it feels like the data is just telling this one specific vertical of a story, but there's a richness in the data that is going on in the background.
And how do you feel about if people want to address that, but they don't have the data or the necessary knowledge to really say, okay, this is a definitive statement? What if people said, well, these are some factors that play into it, or they maybe even phrase it as a question of, have you considered how X, Y, and Z could factor into this? Do you think that's a good approach to, because you can't make a definitive statement without the data, for people to maybe just add that as questions?
Yeah, I think questions is a really good approach, because especially if in some regard the data that you're presenting is the answer, or at least an answer to some of those questions, just to get your audience to sort of start thinking more deeply and even looking more deeply on the internet into the issue. One of the other things I would always recommend is the info packet that we write is designed to give this additional context with additional resources. So one of the reasons I always include quotes and block quotes from specific places is that those quotations tell a particular story that might not be in the data, but that's connected to it. Mm-hmm. And by just inserting a quote and a link perhaps to where that quote came from, those are all in the info packet, you can then point your audience to a place where they can really engage in the complexity and maybe drill down a bit more deeply into the issue so that they can understand what these barriers really mean. You know, what does it mean that there's a gender gap? Well, that means there's systemic, national level inequality and inequity across this particular system, but that represents an inequity across everything else, you know?
Yeah. And I love having you on this, and, you know, also obviously getting Seth's input in the other sessions is you guys know so much about this, and you bring so many facets to a topic that most of us probably wouldn't consider. I mean, I always think, oh, I'm so woke. I like to be, but there is so much I just don't know, and so many complexities. So to everyone, you know, I hope this is also helpful for you guys to also understand, hey, there is so much more to this. It's not as black and white as we might think. Let's have, how are you for time?
I have time.
Okay.
I love talking to you and your community. It's great.
Excellent. So I hope people are still happy. If you're enjoying this, by the way, maybe post like a little thumbs up or something, or an emoji of your choice, whatever you think fits Helen and I. Post it in the live chat, because
that's such a risky movie. But
I know. Maybe I get like a banana or a strawberry or avocado.
I'll get Big Bird because of my previous comment.
Maybe. So there is a Viz here by Zainab, and she has created, like, this is, I looked at it, I'm like, this looks really cool. So I want to take it apart because I want to understand it more. You know, it's the first impression is definitely grabbing my attention. So now it's down to us to figure out, okay, what's going on here. So nearly half of the world are offline with no access to internet, but it is worse for women. The digital gender inequality. Maybe just drop the and just make it digital gender inequality, or make it the digital gender gap. Okay, so I'm going to click on the hamburger button. Okay, it has information about the Viz. Nice.
I also love this Viz because it visually captures what I was trying to say earlier about the other side of the data and the lack of parity, right? You can see what it would look like for these things to be balanced because, you know, where it comes to mobile phone access and internet access, you can just see the gap. You can see the empty space.
Yes. So I'm guessing the middle, okay, so the vertical middle is the 50%. I just wanted to make sure. And then the red one at the top, we see, I mean, my first thought is, oh, you know, half and half. Is that equality? But this is not men and women on one side and the other. Some countries are well above 50%. And I mean, they should all be at, you know, very close to 100, ideally, right? This is about how many people can access the internet. But there are still a lot of countries that are below 50% internet access. And what I like is that she's used the dark color to show kind of the negative, right? Where there needs to be work, because then the dark color goes to the right side. And like you say, you know, we see the disparity as I hit my mic. So what do you think of that?
I completely agree. And I love the way that the dark and the light has been used. In addition to just the contrasting colors, I think there's a fun element to the visual of this Viz. It makes you want to dive in and play with the data and play with what's being said here. But I do agree. I think the fact that you have this line, I think it's really powerful that the line in the top section with the red circle is showing what's going on below 50% in these countries where there really isn't access to the internet at all. And then you could see like the movement from darkness into light. And Seth always talks about that as being such a powerful message. But then, you know, even though once you move into the yellow segment and the blue segment, that central line no longer represents 50%, it represents a 0% gap. And it really powerfully tells the story about how you want to be congregating in the lower quadrant, in the lower sections of this Viz around that middle line, because that's parity, you know? In an ideal world, all the dots in the red circle would be to the right. Everyone would have access to the internet. And then all of the dots in the lower two sections will be congregating around the middle and have parity.
Definitely. And I would love, just because we have a bit of white space on the sides of these sections, maybe a little bit of annotation would be great to say exactly what Helen just said. You know, where you have your red dot, you say, over time, ideally, all the countries should move to the right, which means the highest amount of internet access or access to the internet. And then in yellow, in blue, we want them to be all around the midline, which means parity between men and women, because I think that's one thing that doesn't fully come out here, but it's an easy fix.
Yeah, I agree. I think some annotation would just take it to the next level and make the story really crystal clear.
Yes, and I think the space is there. And I love that as we scroll down, we have a summary, almost. And this doesn't talk about, top or greatest. It talks about least internet access, which is then related back to the red circles, and then the widest internet access gender gap and the widest mobile gap. So I think that's really well done. I would make the font size a bit larger because, okay, I'm at 100%. I think this is font size 6, if I had to guess, or 7, maybe 8 at the max. Make that bigger because it's quite hard to read, and I think again you have the space. The top visors could almost be a bit smaller, and then the bars, just making them taller, giving them space, and making those labels larger.
Completely in agreement, and I just think great job. The only thing I wanted to say about your title is where you say, but it is worse for women. Just bear in mind that in the data we know that just under half the world is still offline, and we know because of the data gap that the majority of that group is women. So it's not just worse for women, it's that those who don't have access are mostly women and girls.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And by the way, strong emoji game there, crew. I'm loving all the chat that's going on. Okay, let's have a look. I think maybe we'll skip Kelly's. No offense, Kelly, but I think we've already talked about the scatter plot. So I want to just see what else we have. And Javid did a map. So maybe we'll quickly have a look at the map. So we've got this hex map, and I think if my memory is correct, yes. So what I struggled with here is that some countries, for some reason, are smaller hexagons than other countries. Maybe just because of where they are, to make sure they all kind of fit. What do you think of this viz and how it helps you understand the data?
My computer just wigged out a little bit, so it's just trying. Sorry, okay. Just give me 2 seconds while it loads.
I will fill the gap.
Thank you.
My challenge here is that countries are represented by more than one shape. So, for example, New Zealand, if it is New Zealand, yeah, it's in a really it's so far away from Australia. I mean, I guess it kind of is, but then New Zealand is one dot, which is okay. But then it's 2 islands. I'm almost thinking it should be 2 dots. I mean, it kind of also has Stewart Island, which is the 3rd one. But Australia has so many boxes or hexagons. So some countries are just a single one. Some are multiple. So I find that quite confusing. What I don't like, I was just about to say, I like the strong use of the color, but I don't understand. So pink says indicates female access is greater or household access is low. Why would you use the same color to mean 2 different things, like in a single description? So I don't understand. But I think it's probably because I have to select the measure. So if I say household internet access, I wonder what it changes. Okay, yeah, I find that confusing. So I would definitely rethink how you color things so that you either talk about gender or you talk about general household internet access, because that isn't broken down by gender.
I think we have the same issue again from before, Eva, of the color legend, where the brightness of the pink doesn't correspond with the darkness of the blue.
Yeah.
Pakistan's gender gap is 70.6%. The intensity of that blue should not be the same intensity in the pink, where it's maybe a minus 9.9%. I just think it gives a kind of really false perspective on the data. It makes you assume that there are countries in the world where women are just massively outranking men in internet access, which just isn't the case.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I just want to quickly note about what's been written here. One of the kind of good news pieces that's been written about in this community who are working for universal internet access is this statistic that 56% of women use mobile phones to perform financial tasks, to manage their bank accounts and things. But critically in the information pack, I did contextualize this percentage data to make sure that people understood that in spite of that, that's only out of the group of women who can access mobile phones.
Okay.
And progress towards women having access to phones is really slow. So it's kind of, again, it's a bit misleading. It's kind of making a point that's presenting a more positive story than perhaps is true.
Okay, that's good to note. Let's do one more, and then we are going to be at 4:15. Which one do you want to cover? Do you want to pick one?
Oh my goodness.
No.
Okay, well, I do have to say, Rohan's, I did look at it and it immediately made me think of the electoral map, which caused me stress today.
Yes. Just being mindful of the colors, especially in a US context.
Yeah.
And you know what confuses me? Not growing up, living in New Zealand, the Conservatives are blue and the Labour Party is red. And also
that's the same in the UK. That's the same here, right?
Yeah, and in Germany the Labour
Yeah, it's
Party
all back
is
to
red.
front. Yeah, I know.
Anyway.
Oh my, Eva, it's too much pressure. You have to choose.
Okay.
I can't do it.
Okay,
I feel like I would be singling someone out.
Okay, let me scroll up and back down. Okay, let's pick Ahmed Massoud. I saw him post. Oh, actually, I need to click the link. I saw him post this on LinkedIn, but have not had time to really look at it in detail. And the reason I have added this to the list is also the use of imagery and colors. You didn't provide imagery this week, and the main reason I stay away from taking pictures and putting them in my Viz is because I'm just not great at blending them in and making them part of it. I think the issue I have here is not, okay, there's a, it's worked nicely into the title, but I'm very sensitive these days to, okay, what do I portray with, having a picture in my title? So in this case, we have a woman of color, and it's about the digital gender gap. And is that an issue? Like, I don't know how to feel about it.
Yeah, I agree. And, I don't know where the picture was taken or who the woman is. I don't know if she consented to the image. There are so many pitfalls to public use of photography you just have to be aware of. And visually, I like the look of it, but yeah. I just think it's probably wise to avoid it in situations like this.
Yeah, and I think as we're talking here about so many different countries, if you find a picture that you're allowed to use, that has a free license, make sure to put that in your footnotes where you got the picture from and that you're able to use it. But also maybe you can find one where there are more people, so you get a more broader representation of different types of people, so that it doesn't look like you're singling out someone or stereotyping people necessarily. Because on the one hand, this woman is holding a mobile phone, so she is clearly connected to the net, unless, it looks like a smartphone. But also, are we suggesting that women of color have less access to the internet, or women of this age? Like, I think there's a lot that can be connected to the picture, and I'd just be very mindful. In terms of color, I think, I love the red of, visualize gender equality, but I think we have to use it sparingly because it can be very red and very in your face. And I think red on top of other colors always makes me think of, the accountant marked something that I miscalculated or something. It's always a bit of the teacher marked something I did wrong. So it could look like, is this meant to still be red? Did someone not fix it before it was published? And the red outline and then having the blue and orange just doesn't look very coherent. And I think given that the Viz itself, is clean, I like the labeling, I like the annotations, but I would rethink the colors. And if you want to stick with the picture, why not use an orange I think the orange is pretty good with that kind of wooden background, and then maybe that teal color from the jumper of the lady, or some other, like something that blends with the image more.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, again, I'm always excited to see people looking at the SDG color, but in this context, if it's not also going to be in the Viz, or, I think the red really clashes with the blue and the orange.
Yes.
Just to be aware of that as like an additional an additional layer. But I love your idea, Eva, of using, maybe a color picker on the image if you're going to use an image to sort of bring that into your viz as well.
Yeah. Okay, so well done, everyone. I think everyone who we haven't covered, we have covered the types of vizzes you've created. So I hope that you all got something from today's session. Helen, I'm going to bring our faces back on screen. I can keep my glasses on. Sometimes there's like a weird reflection.
Oh, I have a weird reflection.
I did want to bring us back. And actually, how do I make this full screen now? Here we go. There we go. So, yeah, we're looking forward to seeing more people work on their vizzes and submit them throughout the coming days. I do want to acknowledge there is, of course, a very big political event happening this week right now. So if people feel like, oh my God, I don't have time to work on it, or they don't have the capacity, they feel stressed, like, please don't feel pressured. We will happily see your vizzes next week or on the weekend. We will pay attention to that. We'll have the usual schedule of, over the coming days. I'm going to pull together my favorites for the week. I'm going to do the recap video on Friday, and that's always fun. I really enjoy that. And I know that Helen and the team, they're also looking very closely at what everyone's creating. Any more suggestions in general for people who are participating, Helen?
I just, I always want to thank the community because it's had such a huge impact, and creating these visualizations, in the lead up to this week's publication of the data set, I shared some of these, visualizations that have been produced by the community with the World Wide Web Foundation, so they could see what we really mean when we say, we're doing this data advocacy work with data visualization. And people were just blown away, right? They're blown away by what you're producing, by what it can do for advocacy efforts, in particular for the NGO sector, especially when you consider that so many nonprofit organizations just have no access to this kind of talent from the data community. So first of all, thank you. Second of all, always, if you have questions about the theme, about the data, you can always tweet us at OpFistula, and I'll reply as best I can, whether that's through DM or directly on Twitter. And, never be afraid of exploring these issues more. The whole vision for Viz5 is that it's a way of really showing the overlap and the interconnection. If you were to go back as a community and look at the previous month's Viz5 and the countries that are highlighted as having the most extreme inequities, I would wager that they're going to be in every single data set we've covered. So these are really big global problems, and they have complicated solutions, and you guys are helping us break them down using data.
Absolutely. And I also want to thank people for participating, because I always like building analogies. And with the vizzes you're building, imagine yourself being an NGO, and you might have one person working on data viz, if anyone, right? It's like eating jam on toast, and suddenly we do this in Makeover one day, and it's like they're suddenly going to a full-on buffet, and they can eat fruit and dessert in whatever order they want, and they can eat mains and like anything they would like. It's all on the buffet, and it's such an amazing contribution, because it's not that their people can't do it, but they can't do as many vizzes on the same topic and showing as many perspectives and different styles. So your work really matters, and I know that Helen and Seth and the team, they share your visualizations with the organizations they work with, and people are paying attention. And we are gonna, between us, we're gonna make an effort to make that even more, happen, to show, hey, this is what we've created, this is what we've collated. We're trying to get data behind the scenes about Viz5 to see what everyone's submitting, and make that more accessible for people. So please keep up the great work. It's really, really fun. And it's always cool to watch as well what goes on and what people come up with. I mean, we learn so much as well. And I haven't created my viz yet, and I've got lots of ideas now. Now, one thing I cannot resist, you've seen it on Twitter, you've seen it on LinkedIn, I just need to hold it in the camera because I'm so excited that finally, after many, many weeks of waiting, I have the Empowered by Data book in my hands. This is not a sales pitch, because you don't have to buy this. All of what I've written in here is somehow worked into what I talk about and all of that. But what you could do is maybe get your employer to pay for it. It's also not super expensive, but what it is a manual. Like, if you've been wondering, what is it? Is it, a bunch of stories? Is it some instructions? It's a mix of stories and templates and my recommendations. And I would say it goes well beyond analytics communities. It applies to any kind of communities. And what I'm planning to do is, you've seen probably a few interviews of people who are in the book. There's going to be more. And I'm also going to basically go through every chapter and create video content around it. So if you're interested and you don't want to spend the money, just stay tuned and wait for the videos. You just have to be a bit patient. But I'm just really excited and I'm proud. And without you, the community, this book wouldn't have happened. So thank you. Because also, Makeover Monday, of course, is the community that triggered me to be able to write about something in the first place. But because of Makeover Monday, in 2018 at Tableau Conference, Adam Grant actually talked about Makeover Monday and he called us out as community leaders. And I emailed him afterwards because I wanted some advice. He invited me to speak in Philadelphia last year in April at an event. And that event was what made me think I should write a book about this. And that's how the book came about. So it's all like Makeover Monday is the core of so many things in my life. So the book is also a sign of appreciation to everyone out there. And with that, I think we're going to close out. Let everyone get on with their day and with their visits. And thanks for tuning in as always. Thank you, Helen, for joining me and helping out.
Thank you for having me.
And with that, I need to make sure I find the right buttons when we say bye. So take care, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy.